Introduce myself again. My name is Annette from the insurance department in Forbes. This is part of the Forbes webinar sessions. This one is on the Ogden tables. So well done to everyone who's signed up for this one. I'm sure it's a fascinating subject, and it's also quite topical at the moment with the changes coming up in the discount rate. So it is an important subject. So without further ado, I shall move through the slides. Before I do that, just to let you know that the video, this is being recorded, and you will get a copy of the video and the slides as well at the end. If you have any questions, do feel free to put them at the end of the session, and I will endeavour to get back to you with any responses as soon as possible. So do feel free to put questions. And before you end, there is a feedback form that pops up at the end of the session before you leave. So if you'd be grateful if you could feedback for any future sessions, that would be great. So without further ado, let's launch into the Ogden tables. So what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to basically, I'm assuming that most of you will have heard of the Ogden tables, but perhaps won't have, I've never tried using them, and and that I'm hoping that by the end of this session you will be able to use them to work out your multipliers. So that's really the aim of the session. If you're someone who's already very familiar with the Ogden tables, apologies if you feel that I'm going over old ground, but it's always helpful to go over old ground anyway, as a bit of a reminder. So yeah, that's the main aim of the session today. So we're going to go through what are the Ogden tables, a bit of the history and background, what losses are they used to calculate, why we need them, where to find them. I'll go through the tables themselves. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the discount rate and the upcoming changes, because that's very important. And then going on to do a short talk on contingencies other than mortality. And at the end, there is some basic examples for you to have a look at. So next one. So if you're like me and you didn't enjoy maths at school, if you're faced with looking at a load of tables with numbers, then mostly I glaze over if it's anything mathematical, and I find it very daunting. So what I want to try to do with this session today is to show that actually the Ogden tables aren't that bad. They are quite accessible, even for someone who doesn't like maths, which includes myself. So hopefully, like me, you know, when you first look at the Ogden tables, you think, oh my God, I can't cope with that. It's just a load of numbers. Some of you may enjoy maths, in which case great, you'll love the Ogden tables. But if you're like me, it doesn't really do anything for you. You will have found the tables a bit daunting at first. So I'm hopeful that at the end of this session you'll see that they're not that bad. And I've put up there a quote from Sir Michael Ogden himself about the tables. He's said that they have some explanatory notes with them, and he's the quote there is that we must assume that the most stupid circuit judge in the country and before him are the most two stupid advocates. So he's basically saying that the explanatory notes to the Ogden tables are very simple. Well, that's what he thinks, but they are actually very helpful. So if you do get stuck with your Ogden calculation, do look up at the explanatory notes, because they are very good. So excuse me. What are the Ogden tables? Well, their actual name is the Actuarial Tables with Explanatory Notes for use in personal injury and fatal accident cases. The reason we call them the Ogden tables is because they're named after the chairman of the first the first few working parties, Sir Michael Ogden, QC. So that's kind of their nickname, but that's pretty much stuck. But what they are basically are just a load of tables that have been prepared by the government's actuary department, taking into account people's life expectancies, and you can use the figures for when you are calculating lump sum damages for future pecuniary losses. So, for example, your future loss of earnings, you'll have your multiplicand, which is the net loss of earnings per annum, and you will then use the Ogden tables to choose the appropriate multiplier for to apply to your multiplicand. So just going through a bit of the history of the Ogden tables. They were first published in 1984. So we're now on the 8th edition, which came out in July 2020 and as amended in August 2022. So they've only been 8 editions. They have changed a bit over the years. I mean, the initial Ogden tables only had retirement ages of age 60 and 65. So they've been expanded quite a lot since then. In the second edition, for example, that was the first time they brought out the tables for contingencies other than mortality rates. They have changed over the years, and they've expanded on the explanatory notes to make them more helpful. And of course, they've updated the figures in terms of life expectancy. You'll note that it was a Civil Evidence Act in 1995 where the government permitted the use of the Ogden tables in PI cases, and it was then at that time there was no set discount rate, and that was not introduced until 2001 when it was plus 2.5%. So back in 1999, when Wells and Wells endorsed the use of the Ogden tables, they had to apply their own discount rate at 3% at that time, because they determined that it should be based on the yields on the index-linked government stock at 3%. But then later on, obviously, the Lord Chancellor introduced a discount rate. That was the first one was in 2001. So the current chairman of the Ogden Party Working Committee is William Latimer Sayer KC. So obviously Sir Michael Ogden was the first 4 editions. The Working Party is made up of various different specialties. There is actuaries, obviously, there is lawyers, there is even from the insurance industry. So the group sort of produce the explanatory notes and the actuarial tables themselves as well. So I've touched on how they've changed over the years, but how is the 8th edition different to the earlier versions? Well, you'll be a bit surprised to learn that the life expectancies have been reduced a bit, or rather, there's been less of an increase because over the last decade there has been a stalling of mortality improvements in most ages. So they're perhaps a little bit lower than you would expect. The 8th edition also contains an important definition of disability for when you're calculating contingencies other than mortality. And I'm going to deal with that later on in the talk, so we'll come back to that. The 8th edition also introduced the additional table, which I'll also touch on later. So the next question is, what losses are the Ogden tables used to calculate? So basically, it's for lifetime losses. So, for example, you've got someone at age 50, they suffer a serious accident, which requires them to have care for the rest of their life. You will have your multiplicand. So, for example, they'll need to 10,000 a year care, just as an example. And you will use the tables to apply the multiplier to that for lifetime. So for that, you will use tables 1 and 2. I'll come back to which tables you use later. You can also use them to calculate periods of loss until retirement age. So in particular, we are talking about loss of earnings there. And that's tables 3 to 18. You will also be able to calculate multipliers for pension loss. So you'll choose tables 19 to 34 for that. So you will have someone who's going to retire at age 70, and you'll apply the multiplier to that calculation from those tables. There's also have tables to calculate fixed periods of time and deferred periods of time. So, for example, you've got someone who in 10 years' time will require a hip replacement costing 10,000. So you can use tables 35 and 36 to calculate losses where there are fixed periods. I'll go over the tables in more detail as we come through them. This is just a general overview of the type of calculations you can use. You can also calculate where the loss changes. There's ways to calculate that, and there's also calculations for when you're bringing dependency claims under the Fatal Accidents Act. So that's just a general overview of the type of calculations where you will need to apply an Ogden multiplier. So this is just a very basic example. If you're calculating loss of earnings, the basic methodology is multiplicand. So and so earns £20,000 a year net of tax. That's your multiplicand, and you'll then apply the multiplier. That's the basic calculation, assuming that there's no residual earning capacity. So really, the Ogden tables are for obtaining the correct multiplier. So I'll just put up on the screen table 11, for example, just as an example. The tables are set out, tables 1 to 34 anyway, are set out with a table for males and a table for females. So in this case, you've got multipliers for loss of earnings to pension age 68 male. So on the left-hand side, the left column, you'll see the age to the date of the trial. And then along the top, you've got the various discount rates which are to be applied. And as you all know, the current rate, discount rate in England and Wales is minus 0.25%, which is the middle column here. So you will apply that to the age of your claimant at trial to work out the multiplier. I'll come back to the discount rates later on. So that's how one of the tables looks, just so you can see if you've never looked at the tables before. And then obviously that's the same calculation, but for females. So why do we need to use the tables? Why can't we, for example, say, well, the multiplicand is 20,000, and this person is going to retire in 20 years. Why can't we just calculate by using 20,000 times 20 or 10 years or whatever, whenever they're going to retire? Well, if only life was that simple. The reason we can't do that is because if you think the purpose of damages is to put the injured party back in the same position they would have been had the injury not occurred. So if you're just taking your multiplying and calculating by the number of years before they retire, it wouldn't be accurate. It simply wouldn't, simply because when you get your compensation, it's assumed that you're going to invest the money, and there will be some kind of return. So really, the Ogden tables is taking into account the fact that you will be investing the money, and not only that, it takes into account that you've got accelerated receipts for something that you wouldn't normally get for quite a few years. For example, if say pension loss, you wouldn't get your pension till after a certain date, but you're getting it early. So the tables take into account that. So you can't just apply a simple number of years. The tables also take into account mortality risks. So the actuarial tables have studied the mortality rates for the average population, basically. So that is taken into account when calculating the multiplier. And also in relation to loss of earnings, you have to take into account things like there's always a chance that not only that you might die early, but also you might lose your job or have a period of unemployment. So the tables A to D, which I'll come on to later, will deal with that contingency. Obviously, the fact that you're going to invest the money, which it's assumed that you would invest it, and that's why that is taken into account. And of course, it takes into account inflation. So to find the present capital value of a given annual loss or expense, it is necessary to use the Ogden tables, which do take into account all the above. So you select the appropriate table, you find the appropriate multiplier, and then you multiply the multiplicand by that figure. So where do we find the Ogden tables? I've put the link up there. It's on the government website, and which contains the explanatory notes, which are very helpful if you need to do a calculation. It is very useful to look through the notes. We have used light bedtime reading for you. And then the tables themselves, 1 to 36, and the additional tables. The additional tables are only in Excel form, but the notes and the other tables are all in PDF. So those where you can find them. So I just want to talk about the tables themselves. So there are 36 main Ogden tables. So I think I've touched on before, tables 1 and 2. Table 1 is for males, tables 2 for females. This is where the loss or expense is assumed to begin immediately, so at the date of trial or assessment, and continue for the rest of the claimant's life. So you're mainly looking at care, cost of care, which is going to continue for the rest of someone's life. So there you go, you've got table 1, that's for males, sorry. And that goes right up to age 100. I don't think it's shown on your screen, but it does go up to age 100 there. Tables 3 to 18. This is where the loss begins immediately, such as at date of trial or assessment, and continue until retirement age. So the tables set out retirement ages from ages 50 to 80. So 50, 55, 60, 65, 70, 75 and 80. So those are the tables that you would use for and oh sorry, it's age 68 as well. They've put a table in for that. So so those are the tables you would use for calculating loss of earnings. So that's table 3, which is assuming that someone's going to retire at age 50, a male. So you would use the age at date of trial on the left-hand column there and apply the appropriate discount rate to find your basic multiplier. And that's the same table 4, but for females. Then tables 19 to 34, this is where you're doing your pension loss calculation. So this is where the multipliers, the loss or expense will not begin until the claimant reaches a certain age, but then will continue for the rest of their life. So there you've got table 19 for a male, and then where they retire, where you assume their retirement age is age 50. So just to recap, the first 34 tables take into account mortality rates. So in other words, tables 1 and 2 take account of the age to which the claimant is expected to live. And tables 3 to 18 take account the chance that the claimant may not live until retirement age. And tables 19 to 34 make allowance for the fact that the claimant may not live to reach a retirement age. So that's the first 34 tables, but 35 and 36 are a little bit different. So 35 and 36 are basically where you've got a loss for a fixed period. So table 35 is discounting factors for a term certain. So I will give you an example at the end, but just as an example quickly here, you've got a claimant who needs a hip operation in 10 years and it will cost say 5,000. You will use table 35 to calculate how that would be discounted, that the sum of 10,000 would be discounted, to take into account that you're basically getting accelerated receipt for that. And then the table 36 is similar, and that's a multiplier for a term certain. So for example, you know that someone is going to need care for a fixed period of 10 years, say. You can use table 36 to calculate the multiplier for that, where it's a term certain. Tables 35 and 36 are the same for men and women. There's no split between men and women. It's just for a fixed period, and they do not take into account mortality rates. I just want to touch briefly on mortality assumptions. So the tables that we've got are actually, the mortality assumptions are based on figures from 2018. So it's strange that we're now 6 years down the line. So yeah, so they're also based on an average typical male and female life expectancy. So when they say average, they take into account smokers, non-smokers, people who drink, people who don't drink, people who have a healthy lifestyle, people who don't have a healthy lifestyle. So they basically, they take the average, and it's from the 2018 figures. So, and that's for the general population of the United Kingdom as a whole. So if you've got someone who's not typical, then I suppose it's possible for you to argue that it should be a different rate. But because the mortality symptoms are based on the whole population with different lifestyles, I think you'd have some difficulty persuading the court that you should adopt a different rate. But I suppose if you've got specific medical evidence on someone's life expectancy, then you can use that to ask the court to apply a different rate. But generally, the courts will use the Ogden tables, and they're based on average mortality rates. Okay, the Ogden tables, as I've said before, do give tables for retirement ages 50, 55, 60, 65, 68, 70, 75, and 80. So if you have a situation where, you know, the claimant wants to retire at 67, you would have to calculate that separately. And you do that by interpolation. So let me just give you, it's probably easier if I just give you an example. So you've got a female at age 45 at trial, and her state retirement age is 67. So first of all, you would use two different tables, because you've got table 10 is to age 65 females, and table 12 is to age 68. So you'd have to use two tables to calculate the multiplier there. Then you apply the discount rate, obviously. So let's say the discount rate is minus 0.25%. Then you get a figure of 20.07 by applying that to table 10 for up to age 65. Then you'd also do the same calculation for the table 12 to 68. That's 23.03. So the difference between the two figures, 20.07 and 23.03, is 2.96. So because 67 is 2/3 of the way between ages 65 and 68, between the two tables, you'd then calculate 2/3 of the difference. 2/3 of 2.96 is 1.97. And then you would add that to the multiplier for the table 10. So that's how you interpolate manually. And you come out at a figure for the multiplier of 22.04. Apologies if this sounds like a maths lesson, but that's just the way that you would manually interpolate the difference. But I can come on to the additional tables, because the additional tables do allow you to choose any future age up to age 125, and they are more accurate. So you can use the additional tables rather than manually interpolating. So you could use this way, or you could go to the additional tables, use the put the figure in, use the appropriate discount rate, and it will come up at the figure. And in fact, when I used the additional tables, it came up to 22.05, which is slightly higher. Let me just apologies, just had to shut my window. Yeah, so if you use the additional tables, which are in Excel form, then that is slightly more accurate. But the only problem that I've found with the additional tables is that they've only got the discount rates of minus 1.5, minus 0.75, minus 0.25, and 0 for men and women. So if you've got a plus discount rate, which we'll come on to, then they're not going to be as useful unless they publish an additional unless they do send out the amendments to additional tables once we've got the new discount rate, which they may do. So you can use the additional tables to interpolate. It's slightly more accurate, but at the moment, until they update them, I'm not sure they're going to be that much use. So that brings us on to the discount rate, which is obviously very topical at the moment. So the basis of multipliers set out in the tables is that the lump sum will be invested and yield income. And over that period, the claimant will gradually reduce the capital sum. So that those are the assumptions that we make. So for that reason, it's important that we apply the right discount rate to the calculation. And those are the figures across the top of the tables, as we've seen. So the discount rate, certainly in England, and Wales, is fixed by the Lord Chancellor under Section 1 of the Damages Act 1967. Before that, it was basically the way that, for example, in Wales they applied the discount rate was to assume that it was based on the index-linked government stock, which is quite a low risk investment. But the way that the discount rate is looked on now is that it's more realistic to assume that the claimant will not just invest it in very low risk investments, but will perhaps have some medium risk. So it's kind of a mixed portfolio. It's important to remember that the discount rates apply in each of the 3 separate UK jurisdictions. So historically, there have been different rates for England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. So looking at Scotland first, the old rate until very recently was minus 0.75%, and the new rate since 27th of September 24 is plus 0.5%. So when you're doing your calculations in Scotland, you will obviously be applying the plus 0.5% discount rate to the table to get the correct figure. Again, Northern Ireland, that rate has recently changed to plus 0.5. I'm sure you'll have seen the news about that. So any calculations involving Northern Ireland, you would apply that rate to get your multiplier. So what's the position with England and Wales? Well, for many years, the discount rate was plus 2.5. That was originally set in 2001. And then in March 2017, it was reduced to minus 0.75%. And then again, it was amended in August 2019 to minus 0.25%. So we do not know what the new rate is going to be. That rate is about to be announced by the Lord Chancellor. So the review of the discount rate started in July 2024, although they were consulting before that, obviously. And the Lord Chancellor is due to announce the new rate by 11th of January 2025 at the latest. So we've really got only another 8 weeks or so to wait. Unfortunately, I do not have a crystal ball. I can't predict what it's going to be. But there's lots of speculation. I think a lot of people are thinking it will possibly, that the Lord Chancellor will probably make it the same across all 3 jurisdictions now. So in other words, 0.5 plus 0.5%, which as it is in Scotland and Northern Ireland. There's also some speculation that it may be even higher than that in England and Wales, because of the recent returns on investments, which have been improving. And there even is some speculation that it could be plus 1, which is possible. Like I said, I don't have a crystal ball. But if you look at the Isle of Man, which is not part of the UK jurisdiction, that discount rate is 1%, and that's been since November 2025. So that's possible. It could be that. But I mean, generally the prevailing view is that it's going to be better in terms for insurers, for defendants, when they announce the figures. It's likely to return to a positive again. That's the speculation, and we'll find out in the next 8 weeks or so. I know there was some consultation with the Lord Chancellor as to whether they might use a dual rate. That was certainly considered, but I think the prevailing view is that there's not going to be a dual rate, because at least if we use a single rate, then that will lead to certainty and simplicity, whereas it's possible that in future they might consider introducing a dual rate system, but I think the view is that that's probably not likely at this stage. So we'll have to wait and see. So, possible impact of the change in the discount rate. Well, I think in 2017, when it was actually Liz Truss who introduced the rate from plus 2.5 to minus 0.75, there was a quite a massive impact on insurance claims, and I think there was some estimate that it was added at something like 1.2 billion per year, and over 7 billion on current cases at the time to the value of claims. So the insurance industry were not happy with Liz Truss at that time. So yeah, the changes do make a big impact on the value of cases. I've just put on one very crude example here. Let's just say a male aged 30, he needs 50,000 a year care. If you used the old rate, the old rate in England and Wales, which is minus 0.25%, you come out as a multiplier of 59.75. So your calculation of that head of loss alone would be just over 2.9 million. Whereas if you use plus 0.5, which is possibly possibly the rate it's going to go to, the calculation is much less, 2.4 million. And if it's plus 1, then it goes down to 2.1 million. So it does make a big impact. And that's just looking at one head of loss on one case, albeit, quite a catastrophic case. So this change could have a huge effect, probably in a positive way for insurers when it is announced. So what should you be doing with your existing cases, given that there is likely to be a positive change in the discount rate? I think you should at least be looking at your existing Part 36 offers and considering, well, is that offer now too generous based on the old discount rate? Could it be too much if a positive discount rate is introduced? I think that's something that you should be looking at. And when making Part 36 offer at the moment, you should at least consider calculating on the basis it's going to be a positive discount rate rather than using the old minus 2.5%. If you've got trials between now and January, that's a bit. I think you'd have difficulty getting the judge to adjourn the trial, but you could perhaps argue that they should apply a different discount rate, and you could invite the judge to consider the multipliers when the new rate is announced. And obviously it's going to have an impact on reserves. I don't know if you've already looked at your reserves, whether you're going to change them or just wait to see what the rate is, but it could have a big impact. I think the last topic really is contingencies other than mortality. So I won't spend too long on this. This is basically when you're dealing with a claim for loss of earnings. Like I said, the tables 1 to 34, they take into account that mortality rates, but they don't take into account what might happen, for example, if you had ill health, childcare or redundancy, so that you had interruption in your periods of employment. So as well as doing the calculation for the basic multiplier, when you're doing your loss of earnings claim, you would also do a further calculation to get an adjusted multiplier, and you would have to do this by using tables, reduction factors in tables A to D. So I just want to touch on how you apply the further discount to your loss of earnings calculation. So tables A to D are basically loss of earnings to pension age 65 males, not disabled, loss of earnings to pension age 65 males disabled, and then C and D are the same tables but for females. And these were introduced in the second edition to the Ogden tables. So I've just put up there the actual tables as they're shown in the explanatory notes, so you know what I'm talking about. So you've got the age of at trial on the left, and then you've got the various different factors you've got to take into account when applying these further contingencies are whether the person is employed or non-employed at the time of your calculation, whether they have whether they are disabled or not disabled, and their level of education. So that's C and D as well. So it depends on, like I said, the employment state, the disability status, and the educational attainment. So level 1 for the educational attainment is GCSE or below GCSE, sorry. Level 2 is GCSE and A levels, and level 3 is higher degrees. Now that's not very clear, but if you need to do the assessment yourself, then if you would go to the explanatory notes in the Ogden tables, they will give you examples, for example, whether an NVQ, which level that is. So there are much more detailed notes in the tables themselves. And you would use these factors to apply to your multiplier to recalculate to get an adjusted multiplier. So just to give you an example, Jenny is age 42 at trial. She was going to retire at age 60, but she cannot work. To calculate her basic multiplier, you'd use table 8 at the appropriate discount rate. Let's say it's minus 2.5%, you'd get 18.5. But then, because it's a calculation for loss of earnings, you have to apply discount factors in tables A to D. So before the accident, Jenny was employed, not disabled, and she had 3 A levels but no degree, so that's level 2. Which table you would use? You would use table C, females, loss of earnings to pension age not disabled, and the discount factor is 0.85. So you would apply your previous multiplier, which is 18.15, times by the adjusted figure, the discount factor of 0.85, and you get an adjusted multiplier. So that's the further calculation you have to do for a claim for loss of earnings. It's also important to touch on the definition of disabled for when you're using tables A to D. The Ogden definition of disability is quite specific. It's not the same as in the Equality Act 2010. It is based on the definition of disability set out in the Disability Discrimination Act 1995. So in addition to meeting that, the impairment must also be work affecting by either limiting the kind of or the amount of work the claimant is able to do. So when you're applying discounts in tables A to D, do look carefully at the definition of disabled. So just in the DDA, a disabled person is disabled if they meet all 3 of the following. They have to have an illness or disability which is expected to last for over a year or is a progressive illness. They also satisfy the DDA definition in that it has a substantial adverse effect on their ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. And the third one is the effects of the impairment limit either the kind of or the amount of paid work he or she can do. So you have to satisfy all three to meet the conditions. What does substantial mean? Basically, more than minor or trivial. So unless it's a minor or trivial injury, it could satisfy the test of disability for the purposes of using tables A to D and calculating your multiplier. So that can make a big change in your calculation. Just looking at Schedule 1 of the DDA again, an impairment was taken to affect the ability of the person concerned to carry out normal day-to-day activities only if it affects one of the following. So it doesn't have to affect all of them, it can just be one of those. Mobility, manual dexterity, physical coordination, continence, ability to lift or carry or otherwise move everyday objects, speech, hearing or eyesight, memory or ability to concentrate, learn or understand, perception of risk or physical danger. So it only has to affect one of those for it to affect the normal day-to-day activities. So, for example, if you look at the manual dexterity one, if you've lost function in one or both hands and you've got inability to use a knife and fork at the same time, or difficulty in pressing buttons on a keyboard, that is would be defined as affecting your normal day-to-day activities. So it's important, if you are using tables A to D, to just satisfy yourself that are you looking at someone who's considered to be disabled, and look at the definition in the explanatory notes. Is it possible to depart from table A to D discounts? Well, it may be appropriate in certain circumstances. I guess you would have to argue, depending on the particular circumstances of your particular claimant, but it's certainly arguable. The tables A to D are a measure of the average. So yes, if you've got someone who's unusual, then it's arguable that you could apply a different discount. Now, I'm nearly at the end of the session, and I've set out at the end some very basic calculations, which I won't go through in detail. I'll leave you to read them. Like I say, you will get copies of the notes and the video at the end, but it does set out here a basic calculation of loss of earnings, one where the claimant will never work again. So you'd use table 10 for this particular claimant, which gives a basic, and these all these examples are using a minus 0.25% discount rate, which obviously might not apply again in the next in the coming weeks. So that it just sets out how you would calculate it. So I've got an example there where the claimant may never work again, and then further discount using tables A to D. And then I've got an example where the claimant still has earning capacity. You would do the calculation part A going through the pre-accident earnings, and then you would also work out mitigation for any residual earning capacity, and then you would take the sum from part A and take away the part B calculation to get your overall calculation of loss of earnings. Apologies if I'm going through this too fast, but like I say, I don't think I've got time in this session to go through them in detail, but you will get copies of the slides at the end, so you can go through them in detail. I've also put you on a calculation there of a table 35 calculation for when someone needs a hip replacement in 17 years, or someone who needs to buy a car in 10 years and then another 10 years after that. So those are the type of examples where you would use table 35 to come out at your calculation. I've also put a table 36 calculation here. So this one is where someone needs £7,555 a year for care, and they need it for 7 years after they've had their until they have their hip replacement. So on that you would use a term certain, so you've got table 36. I've also got a calculation there where someone loss starts running in the future, which is another table 35 calculation. Recurring losses, yeah, you can feel free to use that. And I've also put an example of losses where someone's life expectation is slightly reduced. For example, someone has a medical condition which reduces her life expectancy for 4 years. And you would normally use table 2, but because the life expectancy is reduced, you would probably use a calculation by treating that person as a 59-year-old rather than as a 55-year-old. And then another calculation where someone's life expectancy is reduced significantly. So instead of using a table 1 or 2, you would probably in that case use table 36, which is a fixed term calculation. Finally, to find a person's life expectation, you can use tables 1 or 2. And apologies if I've zipped through that very quickly. Do feel free to send me any questions, and I'm more than happy to answer them. And thank you so much for your time. Don't forget to wait and fill in the feedback at the end. I'm now at the end of the session. Thank you.